right, hello everybody. It's about 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon. My name is Nick Altman. I'm the HOA Information Officer with the Colorado Division of Real Estate. With me on the call today is David Donnelly, the Education, Communication, and Policy Manager, also with the division. Hey, David, how you doing?
Very good, Nick. Thanks so much for everyone for joining us. Got a lot of bills to cover today, so really excited about this webinar for y'all.
Awesome. The topic of our call today is, of course, on the 2024 legislative updates that impacted or affected HOAs in Colorado. So we'll also go over a couple lost bills that, while they didn't become law, we feel they were important to mention nonetheless. And then we'll wrap it up with a couple comments on the Corporate Transparency Act. So as David mentioned, it was quite the busy legislative session, and we'll try and get through this material as quickly as we can. We hope to be done by 1:15 or so, but if it goes to 1:30, we'll try and definitely end it right around 1:30 or so. So that way you can get back to your busy Friday afternoon. So for this presentation, as an attendee, you'll be able to submit questions via the Q&A tool on the bottom of your screen. David and I will both be speaking about the bills. So as the other is speaking, we'll try our best to answer those questions as they come up. And of course, the slides and the YouTube video to this presentation will be posted to our website likely sometime next week. And let's get into it. So of course, as always, some of you might be new attendees, and we just want to go over real quick again what the HOA Center does and does not do. So the HOA Center, we provide information to homeowners regarding their basic rights and responsibilities under HOA. We also gather and track complaints and report those complaints to the legislature on an annual basis. Our annual reports are posted to our website. We create resource materials and put on forums such as this one. We have a website. We also register HOAs. What we don't do is we do not mediate or arbitrate on behalf of homeowners or board members. We cannot intervene or investigate a dispute. We don't act as a regulatory program, and we do not assess fines or penalties. As always, this presentation should not be construed as legal advice. If you had any questions or were concerned, please consult with a qualified Colorado attorney. So just kind of the outline structure of this presentation so you can have an idea of the pacing. We're going to talk about the bills that were made into law, and we ordered them based off how we felt were most relevant and important to Colorado common interest communities. So it'll kind of be like a countdown to least relevant to most relevant, if you will. And beginning here with number 15. So we have 15 bills that became law, and we'll start with House Bill 241173, Electric Vehicle Charging System Permits. And this one, prime sponsors on this are Senators Priola, Sonia Lewis, and Rep. Alex Valdez. We'll just say quickly when it was introduced, when it was signed, and the effective date of each bill. So this one was introduced on January 31st, signed May 21st, and effective August 7th. So House Bill 1173 basically streamlines the permitting process of counties and municipalities so that more EV charging systems can be constructed at reduced time and cost. Essentially, the state of Colorado wants to lead in this endeavor. So this bill helps counties with the permitting process so that more EV charging systems can be built. There are certain conditions for counties on the approval process, and also when they may deny a permit for application. So kind of just things to keep in mind. This bill appropriated funds to the Colorado Energy Office for use in awarding grants to state agencies, other public entities, including local governments, landlords of multifamily apartment buildings, and as well as unit owners associations of common interest communities. So if you're a board or if you're a homeowner within an HOA, certainly consider contacting the Colorado Energy Office and see if your HOA would qualify for funding for EV charging stations on the association's property. Going on to our next slide, and then James is going to take this one.
Excellent. So SB 24-129 is really only ancillarily related to HOAs. However, we felt that it was an important one to discuss with you all because of, as Nick mentioned, many of you are familiar with the Corporate Transparency Act, a federal law, the CTA, and these two bills on their face, this bill and the Corporate Transparency Act kind of are different. They show the different priorities between what we do here in the state of Colorado and what the federal government is doing, what they're more concerned about. So most importantly on this one, again, this isn't a bill that's going to require action or activity by your boards or your own unit owners. But it's just a good thing to keep in mind. But it does go into effect on August 7th of 2024. So with the next slide there, Nick, we can talk a little bit about it. This, if you can advance to the next slide. Oh, there you are. You did. I'm looking at a different screen. I apologize, everybody. What this bill does is it talks about what PII is, personal identifying information. That could be health records. That could be names, addresses, telephone numbers, email addresses, social security numbers, and the like. So going forward, what this does is prohibits the public, which such as the Division of Real Estate, such as other organizations, from collecting and disclosing public or this kind of personal information, the PII, except under certain circumstances. And again, since this bill affects the state, why are we talking about it with you all? That's maybe the question that you all have on your minds right now. And we wanted to use this as an opportunity for board members to be reminded that there are all sorts of scams out there. There are all sorts of fraudulent activities going on. And so you as board members in particular should be ensuring that you're taking reasonable steps to protect both member information, but also your board information, your officer information, as well as vendor information. Section 38-33.3-317 clearly delineates the types of records that a board is required to maintain and also make available to your community members. But that's not to me. I'm just a member of the public. I don't get to come to your board and say, give me your bank accounts, give me your member roster. But a unit owner, a member of your association, does have that right. So just to keep that in mind, to keep those things juxtaposed, that you have to protect that information from fraudsters and the public, but that there are obligations that you as board members have to maintain with and share those records with your community members. Next slide, Nick.
1 second, David.
No worries.
There we go.
The next bill I'm going to chat about here is a really interesting bill. It's Senate Bill 24-129, 158, and 158, or excuse me, 058. I apologize. This bill was presented and introduced in January and ultimately signed in May, and it also has an effective date of August 7th, and is a really interesting bill. You can go to the next slide there, Nick. What this bill does is modifies the Colorado recreational use statute. As so many of you know, Colorado is got tons of wonderful outdoor things to do. We got horseback riding, we've got skiing, we've got hiking, we've got mountaineering. We have all sorts of things that people can do, and some of those activities happen on either your personal land or a community as common elements. Many of you might have common elements that a 15-acre to 35-acre plot for horseback riding or hiking, bike riding, whatever the case may be. And what this bill does is changes the liability of the owner. It makes it so that an owner, whether that's an individual homeowner or an individual or an association, from being liable, provided that you have adequate signage. The owner must post a warning sign at the primary access point. That means like the trailhead, for instance. If we're talking about a hiking trail or the road, and that clearly expresses to the individual entering the land that there are potential dangers involved on the property, cliffs, falling trees, what have you. But you need to explain what that dangerous condition is, or what the structure is. Maybe it's an old mining shaft or an old cabin, something like that. And then most importantly, a board should take the extra step to photograph that evidence, take a picture of the sign. And I would suggest taking a picture of that sign on a regular basis, maybe every quarter, maybe every half year, something to that extent, so that you have, because if you put up a sign and then let it degrade over the next 10 years, it's illegible. That's not going to fly. The signage has to be clear. With that, Nick, you want to go to the next slide, and we can talk a little bit about some of the additional requirements of the signage. It has to be in a specific location and a specific size, and it also has to have specific language. So it's pretty straightforward. It can either be 8 by 10 or 10 by 8, at least that size, inches wide and tall. And it also, again, I mentioned before, it has to be located in a conspicuous place at the access point, or the primary access point for the property. Next slide, Nick.
Sorry, David.
You're right.
There we go.
So now we're going to talk about House Bill 25-1051. This was presented by Rep. Botzenecker and Morrow and Senators Julie Gonzalez and Kevin Priola, and also has an effective date of August 7th. Next slide. For those of you that have joined us for our past legislative sessions, we talked about House Bill 2 years ago, 1314. That was a major overhaul of the non-consensual towing regulations here in the state of Colorado. But importantly for you all, how did that affect HOAs? At that point, it imposed new restrictions that a board had to post notice on a vehicle and provide that notice at least 24 hours in advance before towing a vehicle from a common element, such as from your common parking lot in a condominium or a townhome. And this new bill, 1051, adds to that. Now, it's not something that the board specifically has to do, but your board, you board members out there, and your community association managers should be ensuring that any towing company that you contract with is aware of this bill and is following this bill, because we don't want to come back and create a mess where someone is improperly towed at your direction. And the towing company listens to you, but isn't doing it properly. So you want to ensure that when you're talking with any vendors, that your vendor knows about this bill and is committed to following it. So most importantly, the change here, it now requires that documentation of permission has to be presented for every single individual tow. And it has to be done on a specific form that is created or will be created by the Public Utilities Commission. That's one of our sister agencies here in Dora. The PUC will draft and prepare a form that is going to be available for use in this way. And then it must be signed by someone with authority. If I'm not on your board, I can't say, tow this guy. A board member could sign that form. You as board members could authorize your community association management company with the authority to sign that form as well through a resolution. You should hold a board meeting, vote on that, and then that would be able to grant that authority to your community association manager. Importantly, documented permission cannot be automated or pre-approved. We don't get to. There's no such thing any longer as saying, if you see somebody that's been there for a while, just tow them. You have to direct the towing company each and every single time you want a tow to take place. Provide the 24-hour notice. If the vehicle is still there, then you can tow it. Next slide, Nick. This slide has a lot of words on it, but it goes into the signage requirements that are now set forth in House Bill 24-1051. Again, not something that you as board members, you don't have to create this sign. Your contracted towing company would present this to you, but nevertheless, you as board members need to know what the requirements are. That it can't be less than 2 square feet in size. It has to have lettering that is at least 1 inch in height. The lettering has to sharply contrast with background colors of the sign as well as the structure. So if I have a red brick building, I shouldn't make my sign red and my lettering orange. There's no contrast there. Black and white, we got a lot of contrast there. Putting it on a black wall, probably okay as long as the background is white. So these things need to be importantly considered and carefully considered by your boards, because placement, we'll get to placement in a moment, is also another important thing. The information that must be involved here is that it has to state that there's a restriction or a prohibition on parking. And if there are specific days and times when parking is not permitted, this needs to identify that. If the parking lot is restricted parking at all times, which is common for many of your common element parking lots, language that says authorized parking only will suffice for that. And then also the name and a telephone number of the towing carrier. Signage must be in English and in Spanish by law now. And it needs to be permanently mounted in locations that are specific to. At the entrance to the private property so that the sign faces outward towards the street in a manner that anyone that would be driving towards the entrance would see it, but also inside the parking area that faces outwards towards the parking area. So again, I mean, I think that your boards can be careful and considerate about where we want to put these. But it's important that they are in conspicuously viewed areas. They cannot be obstructed. If you've got a tree branch blocking it, that's gonna lead you to a world of trouble down the road. Let's use some common sense with it, and let's be careful about this so that anyone that is affected by this is properly on notice. And finally, the signage cannot be higher than 10 feet off the ground, but it also cannot be lower than 3 feet off the ground. With that, next slide, Nick. And I get one more for me, and then I'll pass it back to Nick here. Senate Bill 124-145 talks about uniform unlawful restrictions on land records. This bill takes effect August 7th. This is going to be important for all board members, all community members, as well as the CAMs out there. Next slide, Nick. What this one talks about is it's an attempt to right some historical wrongs in common interest communities. I'm sure are very familiar with the fact that common interest communities, HOAs, POAs, have been used in the past for some unfortunate things to keep out certain types of people. Maybe it's a religion, maybe it's a race. And as a result of that, we have communities, even today, 2024 here, we've got communities that have restrictions, covenants that are restricting the land in your declarations, your CC&Rs that are essentially that are discriminatory, and some of you might have this language in your governing documents today. Clearly, they are not enforceable because we have all sorts of state laws, all sorts of federal laws that prohibit and prevent discrimination from taking place based on sex or gender or familial status or disability or a variety of other personal characteristics. And the law refers to these generally as unlawful restrictions. Next slide, Nick. 145 creates the authorization for a traditional landowner. So anyone that's just owning a property out there, they can simply submit a change to the clerk and recorder in the county where the property is located to amend and remove any unlawful restriction like that. But it's only with respects to the owner's property. I can't do that on my neighbor's property. Is what that means. But for an association, a board now has its authority, a direct authority to submit to the recorder for recordation an amendment of the governing documents to remove an unlawful restriction. And this is the important part, without the vote of the community members. So let's just, I hate this example, but let's use for a moment an example where there are a series of people that wish to discriminate against a certain type of people in your community. Your board, A, they can't enforce that, but B, they don't need to bring this to the community for input. They have the authority to take this, to remove that offending language and update their governing documents with language that is not discriminatory, that does not have those unlawful restrictions in them. In the alternative, it's also important to know that there's an opportunity for unit owners to take some action here. Unit owners may, in writing, request that the board remove language that they believe is one of these unlawful restrictions. And the process by which that happens is a unit owner identifies that language, expresses that that there is this unlawful restriction in place, and then the board shall have 90 days from the date of receipt of that request to determine if in fact it is an unlawful restriction. Generally speaking, I have to be honest with all of you, these unlawful restrictions are they're bold, they're blatant, they're clear in many cases. So it's not, odds are your board's not going to need 90 days to take this into consideration. Once they've made a determination, if they just determine that it is in fact an unlawful restriction, they shall amend the governing documents within the next 90 days. Again, so that brings us from in the next 90 days they can update the documents and then submit that to the clerk and recorder so that it is updated. And again, that does not require a unit owner vote in order to remove that offending language. I believe that with that, Nick, I'm ready to hand it back over to you for a couple.
All right, yeah, I get to talk now. Okay, so we're about a third of the way through. We're at bill number 10 here, as you can see on the top. All right, so we got House Bill 24-1383, Common Interest Community Declarations. Prime sponsors being Rep. Lindstedt and Senator Jeanette. I likely mispronounced that. Introduced March 25th, signed in May, and effective on August 7th. So House Bill 1383 basically modifies the act of executing and recording a declaration to a common interest community. Previously, Kiowa only required a declaration to be executed in the same manner as a deed is executed. In some cases in Colorado, an affiliate of the owner was able to execute the declaration. But now this bill is making it that the owner of the real estate must execute the declaration. There was case law involved with this, and feel free to, it is on the actual act to the bill. So if you're curious about this, I encourage you to look up that case number. So in most cases, the owner of the real estate, you might be asking like, well, who exactly is the owner of the real estate to a common interest community? And in most cases, that is the developer or the declarant of the common interest of the HOA. So additionally, House Bill 1383 requires that any amendment to a declaration that purports to add real estate to an existing property, common interest community, must be executed by or on behalf of the owners of the real estate to be added, as shown by the records of the county clerk and recorder's office of the county where the real estate is located. So again, that has to be, any amendment to the declaration has to be executed by or on behalf of the owners of the real estate, which is to be added. So not necessarily the owner of the common interest community, but the owner of the real estate, which will be added to the common interest community. Moving right along here to Senate Bill 24-021, exempt small communities from HOA requirements. So this one, so it might be helpful first to kind of explain what current law has to say about this. Current law, so under current law, certain small HOAs are exempt from certain requirements of Kiowa, based on the HOAs, based on factors like the HOA's creation date, the number of residential units, and what Kiowa calls the average annual common expense liability of each unit, which in layman's terms is your HOA dues per unit. Specifically, this bill consolidates these exemptions for small associations by first increasing the number of units from 10 to 20 for those HOAs created between 1992 and 1998, and then uniformly applying the common expense threshold and inflation adjustment regardless of when an HOA was created. So it's kind of just tightening that requirement in Kiowa, kind of making it more clear and just less vague, I guess you could call it. So in addition, this bill also provides that a cooperative or a planned community that does qualify to elect for this exemption can also just file an adoption, an amendment to its declaration stating that it would rather just be subject to all of Kiowa instead of just the exemptions, as evidenced by that amendment to its declaration. And then finally, this bill also requires the HOA information officer, yours truly, to notify cooperatives and planned communities that are affected by this bill, including an option or including notice of the option to opt out of this exemption. So stay tuned for more information on this bill and its requirements. And I'm happy to pass it over to Dave again here.
So with House Bill 24-005, this bill is going to take effect in August 7th of 2024, like a lot of these other bills that we're discussing today. But what this one is designed to do is really to address some additional steps towards landscaping and how that affects water conservation here in the West in Colorado. So next slide there, Nick. Primarily, common interest communities and local entities like cities and counties, special districts, metropolitan districts, etc. They are now going to be limited from forward going, and we'll touch base on that again, from installing or planting or placing non-functional turf, artificial turf, or invasive species as part of any new development project or redevelopment project. So an important part of this applies to all common interest communities. So whether you're big, small, young, old in your community, or limited expense community. Next slide. First, let's talk about some definitions. Non-functional turf is any turf that is basically not functional. Great definition there, right? But that includes street right-of-ways, parking lots, medians, transportation corridor turf. So, what this would apply to for new communities or communities that are being refurbished or redone would be a lot of you have that space between the sidewalk and the street. That would apply as to non-functional turf. Artificial turf is simply defined as synthetic materials developed or designed to resemble natural grass, astroturf being the most common name there. And then finally, invasive species. Invasive species are defined as plants that are simply not native to the state of Colorado and that have been introduced to the state either accidentally or intentionally, have no natural competitors or predators in the state, or have harmful effects on the state's environment, economy, or both. Next slide there, Nick. So what we're going to talk about here is for any installation of non-functional turf, artificial turf, or invasive species after January 1st of 2026, this bill applies to. So those of you that have an established community and have grass in your medians and have grass in your street, your that lawn between the sidewalk and the driveway. Some of you might even have a baseball diamond or a park, those types of things. Those of you that already have an existing community and have this in place, don't fret. This does not apply to you. But for anyone that is installing or completely redoing something after January 1st of 2026, this will apply to. So we want to keep in mind that this does not prohibit anything regarding artificial turf on athletic fields, like I said, parks, playgrounds, baseball diamonds, soccer fields, etc. And it also does not prohibit the installation of grass, seed, or sod that is a native plant that has either been hybridized or for the arid conditions that we have here in Colorado. And what we're really talking about, I mean, and if you listened to some of the testimony about this bill, they specifically called out Kentucky bluegrass. Guess what? Kentucky's on the other side of the country. Kentucky's a completely different climate. It's pretty grass. We can all agree to that. But what the legislature has done is said that we don't want that type of water-intensive types of plants to be continuously installed in our communities going forward. So something to keep in mind for communities that are going to do some significant reworking or redesign planning. But candidly, the vast majority of you that are on this call are on this call because you already live in a community. You already manage a community. And so this bill is not going to, or should not really affect the vast majority of you going forward. With that, I think back to you, Nick.
Okay, so Senate Bill 24-134, operation of a home-based business. Prime sponsor Senator Smallwood, Senator Exum, and Reps Wilford and Weinberg. Introduced February 7th, signed on April 19th, effective August 7th. So this one allows a unit owner or a resident of the unit owner with the unit owner's permission to operate a home-based business at a unit owner's unit. So I'll say that one more time. So it allows a unit owner or a resident of the unit owner with the unit owner's permission to operate a home-based business at a unit owner's unit. A homeowner, so essentially an HOA can no longer seek to enforce any covenant or restriction that might otherwise prohibit a unit owner from operating a home-based business. According to this bill, a home-based business means there's a definition they included a definition, and it means a business for which the main office is located at, or the business operations primarily occur at a unit. You may have, I'm sure some of you probably have some questions about like, well, what exactly constitutes, a home-based business, and how will I file for taxes and everything like that. So I would encourage you, if you did have those questions, to speak with an accountant or a tax professional. Home-based business, the HOA may still adopt and enforce any reasonable rules and regulations governing home-based businesses regarding the list of items here. So that could include any architectural control elements related to that business, any parking regulations. Some of you might have a home-based business that would increase traffic in your communities. So the HOA could still adopt rules surrounding parking, as well as landscaping, noise, nuisance, and other matters concerning the operations of a home-based business. So kind of like a call to action here, if you're a board member or a community manager, definitely review your governing documents to ensure that your governing documents aren't inadvertently preventing or preventing a unit owner from operating a home-based business from their unit. All right, moving along to fire-hardened building materials and real property. This is House Bill 1091, Senators Cutter, Lewis, and Reps Brown and Brianna Titone. So actually, this one I will kind of mention here. This was introduced in January, but it became effective almost immediately. Well, I guess once it was signed, it became effective. So the effective date of this bill was March 12th, 2024, which was a little over 3 months ago. So it's entirely possible that your HOA hasn't looked at their governing documents yet, or that there could be some language in there that could potentially prohibit fire-hardened building materials. So definitely take a look at that and make sure that you're in compliance with this latest law. So generally, what this bill does, or what it is it prohibits a unit owner from installing what's called a fire-hardened building material on their property. So there is a definition as well, and House Bill 1091 defines fire-hardened building material to be it's just one definition that the bill included. There's 3 total, but I thought it would be this one was I thought this one was pretty good. So the fire-hardened building material, according to the bill, means the criteria of ignition-resistant construction set forth in sections 504 to 506 of the most recent version of the International Wildland Urban Interface Code. And it's pretty easy to look that up on the internet. So again, just as with the home-based business bill, HOAs can still adopt and enforce reasonable standards regarding how this material is designed, its dimensions, its placement, and the external appearance. Just so long as there are important restrictions here. So they can adopt standards as long as those standards do not increase the cost of the fencing by more than 10% compared to other fire-hardened building materials used for fencing, or require a period of review and approval that would exceed 60 days after the date on which the application is filed for review. And David's going to talk about this one.
This one's a quick one for you all. House Bill 241108 is going to take effect August 7th of 2024. And you go ahead with the next slide there, Nick. Candidly, with this one, many of you are very well aware of the increasing costs of insurance. for not only your own homes, but also for your common elements. If you're on a board, you've very likely seen your premiums increasing pretty drastically over the last few years, and there's a variety of reasons for that here in the state of Colorado. But as a result of those increases, the Colorado General Assembly determined that it was really important that a study be completed, and that study is slated to be completed on or before January 1st of 2026, and in order to make recommendations about what we can do here in the state of Colorado in regards to insurance availability and affordability. So when we're talking January 1st of 2026, that means that we probably are not going to see bills until the 2026 General Assembly legislative session. And that means that we probably won't see any relief in the form of legislation until sometime much later in 2026, or even potentially January 1st of 2027. So why are we talking about this bill now? Because I'm convinced that the Division of Insurance, our sister agency, is going to work hard to really address the issues that are out there for that are so many of you are being confronted with. But currently, the Division of Insurance has developed a toolkit for homeowners and specifically for HOAs. And we wanted to take this opportunity to share that information with you all so that you can go visit that toolkit and review what the availability of the information that they have there. Right here on the web on this slide, you can see the website. It's DOI, that stands for Division of Insurance.colorado.gov/homeowners-HOA Insurance Toolkit. If you simply if you Googled Division of Insurance Colorado, you'd be able to get to their homepage, which is doi.colorado.gov. And from there, no doubt, you'd be able to find this HOA insurance toolkit. But again, we wanted to make sure that we were able to share this information with all of you. They have been holding meetings over the last few months and and are committed to continuing to hold more meetings in the future as they work through this study and are trying to address some issues that are again very, very relevant to everyone that owns property in the state of Colorado right now. Next slide. House Bill 241107, or excuse me, 1007. I misspoke there. 1007 is concerning residential occupancy limits. This bill was passed, signed by the governor on April 15th with an immediate effective date. One of the primary goals of this bill was to expand housing availability by removing some restrictions that we've seen across the state that are affecting, in this case specifically, occupancy limits. Up until the passage of this bill, municipalities and counties were able to sort of write their own occupancy limits. Sometimes they'd say maybe no more than 2 people that are unrelated to the owner can reside in a community, or in a residential dwelling unit, something to that extent. Next slide there, Nick. And so we saw was this patchwork all across the state. Fort Collins had one rule, Denver had another rule, Keystone had another rule. It was all over the place, and there was not a lot of consistency. So what the goal of this was to harmonize the occupancy measures. So this bill is actually nicknamed HOME, the Harmonizing Occupancy Measures Equitably Act. And what it does is it's going to remove those local restrictions and again standardize it by making it so that people living together in a single dwelling it isn't going to be based just on that familial relationship. Now, exceptions to the statewide act are affordable housing programs are not affected by this. Health and safety standards are not going to be affected by it. So I can't have 20 people living in my one-bedroom house, for instance. International building code standards, again, these are some standards that are objective, that aren't determined by the whims of specific individuals. Fire code, same type of situation. Wastewater management. Many of you might live in homes that have septic systems, and septic systems are rated for a certain number of people. Same thing is true for if you're connected to city waters, wastewater as well. Next slide. So we've received a lot of questions here in the state HOA office. Does this apply to homeowners associations, to property owners associations, common interest communities in general? And directly, this bill does not apply to that. It talks specifically about local or organizations such as metropolitan districts, special districts, cities and counties, municipalities, and the like. However, in our experience, we've seen that a lot of HOAs may have tied their occupancy limits within their communities to the municipality or to the county, and so in order to link them up there. So in those types of situations, board members, you should take a look at your rules and regulations and see how they've been manufactured, how they've been created. If they are tying to the municipality expressly, you can probably get that reworded in order to make it so that this bill essentially doesn't apply to you. But HOAs are allowed to provide for these types of restrictions if they so elect. But again, they cannot violate public policy. You cannot base this on a race or a religion or a familial interest. So keeping that in mind, that as long as you aren't violating public policies, that you're in good shape there. So, next slide. House Bill 1233 talks about the collection process here in Colorado. Prior to the passage of this bill, Kiowa did already have effective date May 13th. That's two and a half months ago. No, excuse me, just 1.5 months ago. Nevertheless, about 45 days ago is the effective date on this bill. So all you board members out there, all you CAMs out there, probably take some notes on this one. It's an important one. Next slide, Nick.
Sorry about the driving here, David.
Kiowa already had a pretty robust requirement for policies and procedures, what we would often refer to as governing policies here in Colorado. One of those required policies has long been a collection policy. Back in 2022, a pretty complex bill that we refer to as House Bill 221137 passed and already made a lot of changes to your collections policies. At this time, where we are now, you probably should have already updated your collection policy to reflect the bill changes from 2022. Unfortunately, this law requires you all to update your collection policy again. And I know that's going to frustrate a lot of you out there, but it's important that you update your policies to reflect the new changes that come from 1233. An association, we're going to hit the bullet points here, the important things from this bill. The association must first contact the unit owner before taking action. When we say taking action, we mean filing a lawsuit. An association must still, like from 2022, maintain a record of all of the efforts that on how they tried to contact that homeowner. I recommend a spreadsheet that says today's date, I called them at this telephone number, left detailed voice message, something to that extent. I mailed them certified first-class mail with return receipt requested on May 15th, whatever the case may be. Any contact still must be to the unit owner as well as the designated contact of the unit owner if they have designated someone. Maybe I'm not a native English speaker, but my cousin is, and he lives down the street, outside the community, but down the street. He might be my designated contact. I can tell my community, my board, you got to contact me and my designated contact. It could be my lawyer too. It could be anyone. Next slide there, Nick. The contact with the unit owner must still be in a language designated by the unit owner. Again, those of you familiar with HB 22-1137 know this rule already. And the contact made must be the same for the unit owner and for the designated contact. I can't say one thing to the designated contact and a different thing to the unit owner, with the exception that the designated contact can receive any communication in English, whereas if the unit owner has designated a language other than English, that has to be to a unit owner in said language. Now here's the important change. Contact must be delivered by certified mail, return receipt requested, and 2 of the additional following options: telephone, and that includes leaving a voice message, text message, or email. Now, for those of you that are aware of violation letters and collection letters, it's not something that can neatly fit in a text message. So it's going to be hard for you all to offer to say you are delinquent in your fees by X number of dollars. You have this much time to pay it. You have the rights to an 18-month payment plan. You have the right to obtain a lawyer. You have the right to come and speak to the board about this. There is a litany of several different things that must be included in this. So my question to all of you is, how are you going to plan to leave that? If you're going to leave that in a detailed voice message, be prepared to leave a long message or maybe even multiple messages. Text message, same thing, multiple messages to convey all of the required information that you are required to convey as a board or as a CAM. Email clearly is going to be the most satisfactory for you there, because an email can be as long as it needs to be. But keep these things in mind, because it's certified mail with return receipt requested plus 2 other methods. And finally, and this is an important thing, it actually received quite a bit of media interest as well. An association is only allowed to charge the actual amount of the certified mail. In most cases for you all, that's going to be $3 or $4 to $5. We are not talking about an association getting to charge $75 for drafting this letter and sending it out by certified mail. We've heard numbers as high as $150 from some communities. We've heard other communities that say, "Oh, we haven't been charging at all." Whatever was the case before, this bill now limits it to the actual cost of certified mail only. So keep that in mind. You may not transfer the cost of other forms of communication or the stamp. If you're sending by U.S. mail as well, you're not allowed to charge for the translation if you're translating it into another language. Next slide, Nick. And my last bill for you all today is House Bill 24-1152. Accessory dwelling units. From my discussions with people, I've found that this bill has been confrontational for some and a blessing for others. But nevertheless, what it does do is addresses one of the governor's office's most important policies really in this entire administration, but especially in the year 2024, which is housing affordability and housing availability. This bill, like others, has already taken effect. So you community members out there need to address, look at some of these, at your current policies now, so that you can address this, because I think it's fair to say you're going to have requests coming down the pike. You're going to have architectural. Next slide, Nick. This bill only, well, I guess before we talk about the bill specifically, what is an ADU? It's an internal, an attached, or a detached dwelling that provides complete independent living facilities for one or more individuals. It's located on the same lot as the primary residence, and it also includes facilities for living, sleeping, cooking, eating, and sanitation. So this is a self-contained unit that has everything. It's not just a bedroom and that you go down to the kitchen in the house in order to cook dinner. No, that's not an ADU. An ADU is self-contained and has all of these things involved in it. So with that, next slide, Nick. This bill applies to all common interest communities, HOAs, POAs, etc., pre-Kiowa, Kiowa, limited expense communities. But it does not apply in the situation where you do not have single unit detached dwellings. So even though just one moment ago I said it applies to all common interest communities, it doesn't apply to condos. It doesn't apply to row homes. It doesn't apply to anywhere where you share a roof, wall, or ceiling with your neighbor. So that's an important thing to think about. But the vast majority of our associations in Colorado do contain at least some single-family units. So very likely it could apply in your communities. The association is still allowed to impose reasonable restrictions on these, just like they do on houses, like the colors that are allowed for your houses, or and how big they are and what the profile looks like. But they can the requirement cannot unreasonably increase the cost of construction. So what that means is, like the fire bill that Nick mentioned, the fire hardening bill, we can't have a situation where a board is trying to put onerous restrictions on it to increase the cost so substantially that it's not lucrative for a community or for a unit owner in your community to build one of these. Again, the goal here, we are trying to increase housing stock, make housing more affordable, and this bill in particular, I believe it's about 9 pages worth of talking about the merits of ADUs as a big part of the solution to our housing crisis here in Colorado. And so I want you all to keep that in mind, especially you board members, when you're thinking about establishing rules and regulations around this. The goal is to allow these. The presumption is that they should be allowed in single-family detached dwelling situations, at least. So again, I think that this bill has a lot of opportunity to really create more affordable housing in Colorado, and many of your communities will need to address this and find manners and methods by which this can be allowed going forward. With that, Nick, I think it's back to you for number 1.
All right. And with that, we're going to conclude our presentation. No, I'm just kidding. We'll definitely reveal number 1 here, because I'm sure you all are so excited. You just cannot wait to see which bill we put as number 1 here. Anyway, all right, let's go. So number 1, House Bill 24-1337. So this one is a unit owner protection against foreclosures bill, and it certainly is important. So prime sponsors are Reps Joda, Bacon, and Senators Coleman and Tony Exum, and this was becomes effective on August 7, 2024. And the bill number is 24-1337. So what this bill does is it kind of the crux of the bill is it limits the reimbursement amount for attorney fees that the HOA may seek to collect from a unit owner who is delinquent on assessments, or alternatively, when an HOA is attempting to enforce or defend its rules or bylaws in court. The same limitation applies. So this limitation is it can either be the reimbursement amount can only be for one, $5,000, or two, 50% of the actual original money owed, whichever of the two is less. So there are additional requirements, and now the courts must consider, when they're awarding attorney fees, the amount of the unpaid assessments, whether foreclosure action was contested, and whether the attorney fees incurred are disproportionate to the needs of the case. So those are court restrictions on awarding attorney fees that this bill requires. Additionally, to foreclose on a lien, HOAs must obtain a personal judgment against the unit owner in a civil action. Accordingly, the HOA cannot foreclose on a lien. Again, an HOA may not foreclose on a lien if the unit owner is in compliance with a payment plan offered by the association in accordance to Section 209.5 of Kiowa, which is the 9 required governance policies, and as well as the collections policy that David just talked about. Is the House Bill 22-1137 that primarily that section speaks to. So also this bill does create a 180-day right of redemption following a foreclosure sale. And the order of redemption, according to this bill, is as follows. Number 1, the unit owner. Number 2, a tenant of the unit. Number 3, a nonprofit entity whose primary purpose is the development or preservation of affordable housing. Number 4 is a community land trust. Number 5 is a cooperative housing corporation. And number 6 is the state of Colorado or a political subdivision of the state of Colorado. So that's the order of redemption. And then finally, this bill, in addition to a couple other specifics in the language of the bill, this bill does provide that at least 30 days prior to initiating legal action to foreclose a lien, an association must provide notice to the unit owner that the unit owner has the right to engage in mediation prior to litigation. And this is interesting because prior to this bill, there was no requirement for an HOA to offer, offer the unit owner had no right to notice of mediation prior to litigation prior to this bill. All right, so that concludes the 15 bills that actually passed and became law. So these next couple slides here, and we're kind of wrapping up, we're almost to the end. These next couple slides are bills that were lost in the General Assembly. And by lost, I mean they didn't lose it in the hallway, like they couldn't find the bill, but actually the bill didn't make it, it didn't advance far enough to where it was signed by the governor and passed into law. So it was simply quote unquote lost. So the first one being Regulation of Community Association Managers, House Bill 24-1078. This was brought forth by Reps Titone and Ricks. This was introduced in January, and then it was lost on May 14th. So essentially, this bill would have created a licensure program for entities that operate as community association managers. It would have involved licensing fees and fingerprint-based background checks. And once again, it was lost and did not become law. And then there was also House Bill 1158 here, which was Homeowners Association foreclosure sales requirements, lost on May 14th. So this one kind of similar to number 1. I already forgot the bill number, but it was the one I just talked about. So this one would have updated HOA foreclosure requirements to include disclosures, minimum initial bids, and purchase restrictions, as well as court awards. And it also would have required some additional registration requirements with Dora with us, the Division of Real Estate. However, this one was lost and did not become law. So those were just two lost bills that we thought would be relevant, just to mention. All right, and then finally, we just wanted to mention, we did want to say a quick thing on the Corporate Transparency Act. So some of you might not, this could be the first time you've heard of the Corporate Transparency Act, but it's been making the rounds and making headlines as to whether, does this law apply to HOAs? And I think the first important thing to mention here is that it's not a Colorado law, it's a federal law. It was enacted in 2021 to limit illicit financial activity. And basically, in a nutshell, it just requires beneficial owners, which would be directors, officers, and any owners that own more than 25% of the units in the association, to file certain information with FinCEN. FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So in addition to the 25% control of units, it would also require any individual who exercises quote unquote substantial control over a reporting entity. And the FinCEN does have a good definition of what does it mean to exercise substantial control. So I would encourage you to, the FinCEN actually, it has a really good FAQ section. So I would encourage you all to visit their website and kind of browse through the FAQs as you're able. Also, they did create FinCEN created a registration portal to kind of begin this whole process. And these two links here at the bottom. If you can't click on it now, you should, once you can access this, the slides in the YouTube video on our website, you should be able to click these links. If you're having trouble, you could just send me an email. I'm happy to send you that link by email as well. So that kind of concludes the CTA. So this does wrap up our presentation. We're glad you all were able to take some time out of your days to see what happened with the legislature this past session. I'm sure you may still have some questions. We did try and answer most. You guys have really great questions, and we weren't able to answer all of them. But feel free to shoot Dora_DRE_HOA inquiries at state.co.us your follow-up questions, and we will do our best to get to those. Also, stay tuned on our website. We will post some summaries to these bills. Maybe you learn better by reading than watching presentations. So check out our website in the next couple of weeks, probably no later than mid-July, somewhere around there. And those summaries will be posted in the same sections that we have our 2022 and 2023 legislative summaries. And also you can visit the General Assembly's website directly to look up any bill, past or present, by clicking that Find a Bill tool. So feel free to look up any of these bills that you heard today and for more information on that. Awesome. So I don't know, David, if we had any questions we wanted to try and answer live. I know we answered some in writing, but if any catch your eyes, feel free to.
Just in general, a couple people that were joining us a little bit late might have missed Nick's introduction at the beginning here, where a recording of this presentation will be available on the division's website, as well as on our YouTube page, as well as questions about getting copies of the slides as well, because again, we covered a lot of bills today. We covered them quickly. So, but we didn't feel comfortable keeping you here for 4 hours either. So I'm sure that we could have done that though. But the slides, as well as a link to the YouTube page, will be available on our the HOA Information and Resources Center's website early next week. Usually, we always have to download it and then upload it to YouTube, etc. So that always takes a little while. But you will be able to get the slides and a recording there. Excuse me. A couple other questions, maybe. One individual is asking, can one property have more than one ADU? Candidly, I don't think that the ADU bill really contemplated that as a possibility. So we're not able to answer that question right now. It might take a judge to make a determination of that. But at the same time, I think I think for board members and CAMs out there, contemplation of creating a policy that it does allow at least one is probably that much is in fact required. Whether additional ADUs would be permissible would, I think, be very dependent on the specifics of the community, as well as compliance with local municipalities and counties' zoning restrictions, setbacks, and occupational limits, and water and sewage, and lots of different factors like that as well. So reaching out to your local municipality on or your county, depending on where you're located, would be an important step. In preparing for this presentation, I visited lots of different cities and counties, and many of them already have fact sheets and information up on their websites that pertain to accessory dwelling units. So visit the appropriate municipal website or county website for some additional information that I think will help guide you in that.
Yeah, awesome. I guess one last thing I'll mention here. I hope everybody on this call joins us for next month. We'll be talking about wildfire mitigation and some of the changes to state law that actually it's House Bill, I think it's 1091, the fire hardened building materials for in real property here. I just put it up on your screen there. We have a guest speaker joining us from the County of Boulder, so I hope you all will be able to join us. She's going to talk more about what exactly is a fire hardened building material and ways that HOAs might consider using fire hardened building materials to protect their communities from wildfires. So I hope you all will join us then. With that, I think I'm going to go ahead and close this session out. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend.